Again, your notes, your packets are about 15 pages. There's 106 slides. I did not include something in your notes. I'll give you a kind of extra handout. So it actually has been more than 15 pages. Your notes and the board behind me say either the American Revolution or the Revolutionary War. And that's really what we're heading toward. But as in most trips that are worth taking, you have to get there, right? The journey is part of the destination. So our journey is going to take us in some different places. It's going to cover a period of about 20 years. The American Revolution does not just jump up one day and go, here I am. It is a lengthy period of time that leads us to the American Revolution, and then the revolution itself lasts for about 6.5, 7 years. So things are not going to move quickly. And what we're going to do is we're going to lead up to the Revolutionary War. We're going to look at these events from a broad perspective, the perspective of the United States, because that's where we are. Is Georgia a part of that United States? Yes. Were they? Yes. And so we have to look at the broader context before we can look at a more narrow context. And so we will eventually talk about nothing but Georgia, but we got to get there. And that's part of the journey that we're going to take together over the next couple of weeks. About 3 weeks, actually, is what it'll take us to thoroughly look at the American Revolution and what brought us to the American Revolution. You know, if you meet somebody, say you met somebody your first day of school here, you didn't suddenly. There was a process, a journey that you decided to take together, and somewhere you looked at each other and said, "Hey, you're my best buddy," and hopefully that person went, "Well, you're," okay? And now you're best buddies. But it wasn't automatic, and so what we have with the Revolutionary War is a process. Now, I don't typically give you a lot of dates to memorize, and I'm not going to give you a lot of dates to memorize today or in this unit. But there are some dates you need to be aware of. What I'm more interested in, and some of you have looked at your notes already, and you see that big long list of dates, right? I'm not going to ask you to memorize those. What I want you to do is to be aware of sequence. For example, you should know that the Proclamation Act of 1763 came before the Declaration of Independence. But I'm not going to ask you, when was the Declaration of Independence signed? Okay, and I might even want you to be more specific, July 4th, because everybody ought to know that. I have learned that not everyone knows that July 4th, 1776 is the birthday of our nation. They think it's just the time to eat hot dogs and watch baseball and go to the lake. I don't care about people in China. I do care about people in China, but I don't care about people in China. Michael, I don't care. I do. For example, you need to know that the First Continental Congress came before the Second Continental Congress. That's important, right? And it just makes sense. That the Stamp Act, the Territory Act, the Townsend Act, the Declaration of Independence was ever written. And they are things that are going to lead us to right here. So the Proclamation Act, the Sugar Act, the Stamp Act, the Declaratory Act, the Townsend Act, the Tea Act. Those are all things that we're going to talk about because they are impactful. They may not impact Georgia directly, but they will impact Georgia nonetheless. And they impact the colonies. And they lead us toward this right here. Actually, they lead us toward this right here, because the Revolutionary War doesn't start in 1776. It starts a year before with the Battles of Lexington and Concord. Other things that we'll throw in here, like the Boston Tea Party, the Boston Massacre, those are events that happened before the Revolutionary War. 1776, there's a lot that happened. Some of it impacts Georgia directly. James Wright left. Why is that important? He was the governor, the royal governor, and he left Georgia never to return. Common sense. You may have heard of common sense. Some of you have common sense. Some of you don't have common sense. Actually, a little book written by Thomas Paine. And in it, he talks about really the foundations of democracy. And so, Thomas Jefferson, James Monroe, John Adams, people like that, kind of listen to what Thomas Paine had written. Listen to what John Locke had written during the Enlightenment, and created the foundation for our government. 1778, 1779, pretty important dates. I asked you last week, why is it that France gave up Louisiana in 1763 after the French and Indian War, but yet is able to sell it to the United States in 1807? It's because of what happens in 1778. France says, hey, we'll help. We don't like England anyway. We'll help. And in return, at the end of the war, they get back Louisiana so they can turn around and sell it to us 20 years later. Makes no sense. So Spain, 1779, declares war on England. Not England, but England. And then the 1783 Treaty of Paris. So, sequence. Where are we in sequence? That's what we want to be concerned with. So, let's jump in. Y'all ready? Yes, sir. All right. So, war breaks out, but not that one. Okay? Tension between primarily France and England come to a head. There's a lot of tension about who owns what, who gets to use what natural resources, and it finally comes to a head. War breaks out between countries, England and France. In Europe, it's called the 7 Years' War. Why? Because it lasted 8 years. Why it's the 7 years? 7 Years' War sounds better, though, right? Than the 8-Year War. Yeah. Years' War is what it's called in Europe, and it does spill into the Americas. France and England both have a huge presence on the North American continent, and they end up fighting over a particular part of North America called the Ohio River Valley. Stretches from about Newfoundland down to Georgia. And they're in conflict over it. Who owns this? Who gets to use it? So they fight. And they fight. And the Indians decide we like the French better than we like the British, so we're going to fight with the French. Why do they like the French better? Because they're not trying to take the land. They're just trying to trade. And they do trade. And of course, it becomes known as the French and Indian War. Now, honestly, be honest, okay? Be honest. How many of you thought it was a war between France and the Indians? Okay. It's actually between the French and the British, correct? Yeah. All right. 2.5 minutes. Look, everybody ready? 2.5 minutes. You need to know about the French and Indian War. One in particular I want you to look for, and it has to do with money. Oh, good. Let's go to Hobby Lobby after school today. Y'all want to buy some fake pumpkins? Does he? does. So, what did they say about money? Yeah, England gets into a lot of debt because of the money they borrow from other people, from other countries, from banks even. And so they have to pay that back eventually. So war breaks out. Um, and one of the big things that results from that is England's in a lot of debt. And that play a little bit later. So here's what we're fighting over, this land in the light, well, kind of the medium color there, whatever color that is, like taupe, beige, and the yellow is New France. That's France. This is what we're fighting about. Now, what do you notice about anything? Oh, it is different colors. Okay. Okay, the red line, that has to do with troop movements and that kind of thing. Does it show everything? In fact, it stops where? No. It stops in Virginia. You know why? Because there is absolutely nothing that happens during the French and Indian War in Georgia. It has no direct impact. They're not French or Indians trying to take, for example. And when I say nothing, I mean nothing. Absolutely nothing. So again, there's no direct impact. Does the fighting impact Georgia indirectly? Yes. Probably some trade is interrupted. Um, they may have requested troops from Georgia, but none go. Why? Because there aren't that many there. Okay? Georgia's a small, really young colony when this war breaks out. It's less than 30 years old. So, that's all we're going to say about it. Again, it has no huge impact on Georgia. Now, this does. The Treaty of Paris of 1763 has a tremendous impact, and it is a direct impact on Georgia. The Treaty of Paris is signed in Paris in 1763, and it ends the French and Indian, or the 7 Years' War. France gives up all of its North American colonies, no longer a presence in North America. Spanish Florida is given to England. Why? Because England gives Spain all of that French territory, or a lot of that territory. I shouldn't say all. Why is this important? Because what had been one of Oglethorpe's concerns? The Spanish attacking from Florida. Now that's not a worry. So that's important. And again, the only direct impact from the French and Indian War on Georgia is the treaty that settles it, because it expands Georgia's borders. It changes what Georgia looked like. And that's one of the after effects of war. No, it's not a chemical reaction. Even today, in war, there's usually a change in borders. When the Russian-Ukrainian conflict is over, I suspect, one way or another, there's going to be a change in borders. Don't know that for sure, but I suspect that will be the case, because that's typically what happens. So, what happens to Georgia's border? It expands south to the St. Mary's River. Where's the St. Mary's River? I don't know. It's south. Okay. You look at Georgia's border between Florida, and you see a straight line, right? Then you see a little squiggly line. And then that little humpy dumpy that goes down into Florida. And a squiggly line. That squiggly line, river. The straight line is not a natural border. It's man-made. So, it goes south to the St. Mary's River. It goes west to the Mississippi River. And then it goes north, basically to somewhere around Augusta, actually north of Augusta. And eventually, there will be a border placed at about 35 degrees latitude north. Okay? So the Treaty of Paris has a bigger impact on Georgia than does the French and Indian War. All right, here's a couple of maps. This is what it looked like before 1763. This is what it looked like after the Treaty of Paris, 1763. You can see straight line, and there's St. Mary's River, the Savannah River, Mississippi River, and excuse me, I said longitude, I meant latitude. 35 degrees north latitude. And that's basically where the Georgia-Tennessee border is today. It's a little further south than that. And the question that's been asked today is, what happened? Why doesn't Georgia look like that today? No. Stupidity. No. Stupidity. No, I'll tell you when we get done with, because, you know, it's a lot of fun to talk about. There's a tremendous controversy that happens right around the turn of the 19th century or the 18th century. And because of it, Georgia's forced to give up some land. And we'll talk more about that when the time comes. This is actually a copy of the Treaty of Paris. What's it written in? Why is it written in French? Well, would it surprise you if I told you, had it been signed in London, it would have been written in French? Well, the English fought in it.